Welcome to the VIEW Magazine's Rebel Justice podcast. This is the second podcast in this series about our campaign Someone's Daughter. We look at how photographers can capture the personality of a sitter in a portrait. In our second panel, which was recorded during Photo London in September 2021, Claire Bairstow speaks to activist Jen Reid, photographers Harry Borden Jenny Baptiste, and mental health campaigner Sue Wheatcroft about their experiences on both sides of the camera. This is an exceptional art and activism project where we have paired up world-famous and acclaimed photographers to take photos of women who have been involved in the criminal justice system. Some are survivors, some are lawyers, some are activists, and others are leading women in the public life who've taken an interest in all of the processes. From charging and arrest to incarceration to rehabilitation, they are participating in the dialogue around this. Today's panel is exceptional because we are mixing art and activism. We're talking about the very delicate process of working with a subject away from the world of high fashion and modelling. Ordinary people creating amazing images by telling powerful stories. Harry Borden, let me bring you in first of all. You're at Photo London right now. What is the process of working with the sitter like for this very particular and quite sensitive project?
Well, really, my ethos has always been that a portrait is a record of the relationship you have with the person on the day. And so one of my shoots, my subject came to my home over the weekend, so it was very relaxed. And we just had fun and enjoyed getting to know one another. And really, a successful portrait is basically recording an authentic human exchange. If you kind of take that approach, you get something that has some truth to it. So in both instances, I felt, as is always the case when something goes successfully, that I'd made a new friend, really.
How do you put someone else at ease? You're an artist, you're a photographer, you're used to doing what you do. But if you are photographing someone who's not a professional model and who might have come through some traumatic events, what's your photographic process like? Do you make them a cup of tea? Do you ask them some questions about something they spotted in their home? How does it work?
I try to avoid any preconceived ideas. I tend to sort of respond, I'm sort of long enough in the tooth that I kind of contrive to live a kind of life that is one where I'm sort of relaxed and just having fun and being playful and deriving sort of intrinsic pleasure from the process of taking pictures rather than stamping people with photographic technique. So in answer to your question, all of the above, we basically have a cup of tea, really sort of I have innate sort of human curiosity in my fellow people. So it's nice to sort of get a sense of who people are and what brought them here on the day, and then basically sort of see what happens. I mean, it's a sort of lovely dance and marriage between the photographic technique and the understanding of light. And as I said, kind of meeting another person and getting a sense of who they are. And really you kind of want to be sufficiently in control of the medium that you can just have fun.
Jen Reid, let me ask you, your photos are very spectacular and they're one of the main images of the Someone's Daughter exhibition. What was the process of sitting like for you? No matter how confident one is in daily life, staring down a lens is a very particular kind of experience.
I am very camera shy, believe it or not. I think Leah, who was my photographer, my daughter's Layla, I think, and I'm an older woman and she was younger, so that kind of put me at ease. But the thing for me is you feel really exposed. And I felt exposed in those pictures, hence why I think at the beginning I had my glasses on. And after a while, I started to feel more comfortable with her. But it's that thing of feeling really exposed. She captured my vulnerability, which is quite difficult to do with me. I'm always ready for action in that sense, if you know what I mean. But she just caught that softer side of me. We were obviously in the middle of the pandemic when it all came about again. So we actually met outdoors. She's absolutely lovely, put me at ease, a really, really nice girl. So yeah, it's about me feeling comfortable and feeling vulnerable. And it's funny, until I saw the subject matter of today's panel, it's not something that I thought about, but actually when you pose that question, it's like it makes you feel vulnerable. She got me to take my glasses off to reveal me in every sense.
You feel that the final portraits captures something of you that you usually conceal from people.
Yes. Yeah. And that's probably why I don't like thinking about it. I think that's probably why I do not like my pictures being taken, because there is that softer side of me, and it's about who you let in and who you let see that. It's quite interesting.
I have one more question for you right now, which is, you mentioned that you're always ready for action, and this process of forcible relaxation is quite a new thing. I wondered if what you're describing is a kind of hypervigilance, always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Oh yeah, it's there in my everyday. It always has been, pre-statue, pre-Black Lives Matter. I think I work on a very, show me your cards first. I'll stay silent and strong, but let me see your cards, and then I can give you whatever cards you put down, I'll match them. Put down more, I'll put down more, but it is there.
Sue Wheatcroft, we're moving over from talking about art to talking about activism. We are speaking to Jen and Harry from the very luxurious booth at Photo London. I mean, their screen looks like something, and it's just such a relief to see all the art and the glamour and the beauty happening. In what way can a project like Someone's Daughter get people who are genuinely unengaged with these issues around criminal justice and activism to link into these sorts of debates?
I think I'd learnt a lot through Jenny Baptiste taking my photograph, because before I did it, I treated it like any other photo shoot, and I didn't realise that it's all about getting the person inside rather than just the outside. So I think you can tell a lot. Of my photo, I had a mask on, and so it's all about the eyes, and I think you can see a lot through the eyes.
How did Jenny Baptiste make a connection with you? That connection between photographer and sitter is an intimate photograph that shows who you are, but you're being photographed by a stranger.
Yeah, I didn't feel like Jenny was a stranger. We'd spoken on the phone before, and when we met, Jenny's such a lovely person and so relaxed, and so I felt like we were friends. I didn't feel intimidated at all by what we were doing. But like I say, I didn't realise at the start that it was all about the person, about what's inside.
Jenny Baptiste, let's bring you in here. How do you go about getting inside the life and the mind and the sensibility of the people you're photographing? You photographed some very famous names from a very glamorous world, very fast-moving world, and yet you have to produce quite a personal image of them. What's your method, Jenny?
My foundation from when I started out photography back in the late 90s, shooting a lot of hip-hop artists, I had a limited amount of time. I wasn't given an hour. So my privilege was probably half an hour or 20 minutes. And when I did my degree, I couldn't afford to buy rolls and rolls of film. So I said to myself, I've got to train my eye so that I can shoot X amount of film within X amount of time, because I can't shoot rolls and rolls and rolls. And so I think over the years, I've taught myself to be able to do that, but to also to be able to engage with my subject and get another side of their personality in the image that I end up depicting, because it's really important to me that I bring in their identity, and it's not my perception of who they are, because a portrait is very personal. And with Sue and yourself, I wanted to bring in an essence of your personality, within this short space of time that we had together. And for example, with Sue, came down from up north, and we had just spoken on the phone a couple of times. And, I used that to kind of talk to her about her life, what she had done, what had happened, how she felt about it, what her favourite colours were, just to get an insight into her personality, because I knew I wanted to kind of bring that within the forefront of the image that I was going to put together. And, Sue mentioned to me that the Royal Courts of Justice was a real significant place for her. It was important that she was shot outside there due to what had happened inside. So I didn't take her into the studio under beautiful lights and try and depict a totally part of her personality that really wouldn't have been an honest representation. For me, it's really important as a photographer to try and get insight into whoever I'm shooting and bring that essence of them out.
Jen Reid, something that you said about Jenny photographing famous people, I want to ask you about the question of image. You mentioned the idea of using something like very beautiful sunglasses or a super chic hat. It looks great, but it's also detracting from the other things where you might feel more vulnerable. How important is the idea of constructing an image that's not just about self-defense? It's also about showing the world who you are in a positive way.
Yeah, I definitely agree, but I think that's as and when necessary. And I think obviously being thrown into the limelight in the way that I have, it's doing that in a very intelligent manner. You know, obviously prior to all of this, there would have been very different conversations and very colourful language involved, as and when I see fit to do so. You know, it's almost like I've had to not reinvent myself. I'm still me. My daughter would say to me, "Mum, use your words," and not the fake. It's just very different, and it's I don't have all the answers, but it's that thing of people looking at me and looking at me for I don't have all the answers. It's articulating myself in a way to make myself heard. There's pressure in that way, but it's still about standing strong, still being me, but not giving people all of me. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it absolutely does. And I have a follow-up question. On the route towards becoming an activist, did you have to think quite intentionally about what do I put out there? What do I stand for, and what am I going to say and not say?
Okay, so it's funny you should ask that. At the outset, when all of this happened, I was very conscious of not calling myself an activist, because there's people being out there campaigning, doing this and that for the good of me, etc., and people of colour or whatever it is. As I start to have interviews and start talking about, just as we were talking before, when you're talking, you're realising things about yourself. It's only because you're now vocalising it. And then I just thought, hang on a minute, I've been an activist since I was about 5 years old. I was that person who stood up as the only black child in my school and putting people straight and all by myself, So I have been an activist, and it's just like, actually, no, I am. And now I'm owning it. That's what I'm doing. And I'm now saying, first it was like the accidental activist, but no, I am, and I always have been. But now it's vocalising that and being thrown into the limelight and trying to polish up the rough edges, so to speak. It's very, very different. It's articulating that. But, I'll still be me. I'll only give what somebody is showing me, depending on how deep that goes. But if you want to go deep, I can go very deep. I'd rather the cameras not be on.
We can keep it semi on the surface. We can be frank without having to pour salt in the wounds today.
I'm really comfortable here. I feel really open here. I don't feel vulnerable. I feel comfortable. I feel vulnerable, but I feel comfortable with it because of the company that this is in and what it's about. When it's kind of outside that, we like looking at certain media companies, it's different. So yeah.
That's perfect. Harry, how do you approach the concept of image creation? I mean, you come across as so empathetic and low-key, but you're also participating in the creation of an image. So this is not a totally candid family shot. You're still looking at composition, at photos and lighting, aesthetic and all the other elements. Is all of that conscious for you, or are you very much a photographer that looks into the frame and styles it, or is it really about the feeling?
Well, I think as I've evolved as a photographer, I think initially you're trying to sort of gain a control over the medium. I think when you start, actually, when I started in sort of 30 years ago, it sort of rewarded so-called masculine traits, sort of control and obsession and kind of a degree of virtuoso mastery of this craft. But actually, interestingly, because of technological advances, it's become more something that's more rewarding, sort of traditionally associated with female traits in terms of communication and intimacy and empathy and compassion. Because cameras now are very accessible and the medium is much more open and democratic, everyone's carrying phones and so on, you can get great results with those equipment. Photography is much more interesting and it's sort of mirrored my development as a person. And so I think when I was younger, I was kind of a very typical young man, and I thought of photography in a certain way, and I thought it was about the technique. And then as I've got better, as I've sort of got more, I can sort of leave the technique to one side and sort of concentrate on creating intimacy. And so for me now, I think I look for the emotional impact of a picture rather than it's empty if you're just looking at something that's technically beautiful, if it doesn't have an emotional connection and a sort of intimacy for me.
If you have someone in front of you who is really trying their best and really trying to participate but is seizing up and finding it very awkward and very difficult, you might know that you're not getting it. It just looks very stiff. How do you put them at ease?
I don't have any kind of cynical sort of mercenary techniques. I tend to sort of just improvise. For me, the creative process is one best when things happen playfully. For me, musically, they're truly brilliant musicians are people, jazz musicians that can kind of improvise spontaneously in the spur of the moment. Interesting pictures that I've taken in the course of the last 30 years, the pictures that kind of really invigorate me having taken, at the end of the year, you sort of look back on these really special pictures. Quite often they're moments, and they're moments that just presented themselves. And if you have to be alive to that happening, you can't kind of create these things cynically. You can create a kind of well-crafted image that sort of adheres to certain technical aesthetic considerations, but the really wonderful images that fly are just sort of moments that happen. I mean, one of the things that I realized about 10 years ago, I did this thing called Vipassana meditation, and you just observe your sensations on your body, and you're basically spending the whole day meditating. It's kind of like hardcore meditation. And the idea is that you sort of get in the moment. And then I had this sort of realization that during the course of my career, that one of the reasons that keeps me taking pictures is that you're literally capturing moments when you take pictures. You're literally in the moment. You can't do it in a kind of considered and controlled way. You have to sort of just be totally connected and in the moment and in the flow. And that's when sort of magic happens for me.
This is where I want to bring you into, because Jenny Baptiste mentioned something about the environment you chose. Why were the Royal Courts of Justice so important for you? And why was it so resonant emotionally for you to be photographed there?
I'd done a conference there for the Prison Reform Trust, and they asked me to speak about my experience in prison. And I don't know if you've read it, it's in the VIEW Magazine. It was about a particular incident and what it's like in prison for people with mental health difficulties. And I'd like to come back to what Jen said earlier about she thinks she's always been an activist since the age of 5. But for me, it was the opposite. And I don't think I didn't have the strength, I think, until I went to prison. Prison gave me a lot of strength, because that's where I decided that, no, I'm going to do something about this. I'm not going to take it laying down. I'm going to speak up for myself, which is why I spent so much time in segregation. But when I came out, I was determined. I was more determined than I'd ever been. I was in my 50s. So the Royal Courts of Justice was a turning point. It was one of the first times that people really listened. I mean, I do a lot of writing, and it's okay if people read it, but when you're doing a speech and you can see people's reaction, it's so much better, and it spurs you on as well. I mean, I've done quite a lot of speeches since then. Before prison, I couldn't have got up. I mean, I am an academic as well, and I used to do promotion for the book that I wrote. I was so nervous, but now I'm more like, oh, pick me. I'd knock people over on the way to the stage. I can credit, I suppose, prison for that, but not in a way that I didn't do courses and things like that. It didn't help me that way. It just made me determined to help other people because I could see the injustice.
You say that so powerfully, and you are so inspiring, and yet Jenny's picture of you is actually with this black, almost military-looking mask on it, and all of your personality is in your eyes, and with the full determination and resolve. I wonder what was going through your mind in those moments that Jenny was photographing you, because the photo is so impactful even though we're just seeing this much of you.
We had quite a few photos, obviously. When it came to that one, I was wanting to show strength and determination. And what I was thinking at the time was, I'm not putting up with it anymore. That kind of attitude, I wanted that to come through, I think, determination and strength. And I think it's also It's interesting for other people who don't think that they're strong enough to do certain things. If you've got lived experience, I think it spurs you on. You couldn't do this kind of work without lived experience, could you? I mean, you wouldn't be as determined now without the lived experience you've got, probably, would you? I mean, saw a lot of injustice as a child, but I didn't have the strength then, but I do have the strength now.
Jenny, can you tell us how you engage with your subject before you meet them?
I think I was quite conscious that everyone had just kind of come out of lockdown. I shot you in September last year, and I felt that it was important that I couldn't just go to your house with a camera and expect to get the essence of your personality within the image that I wanted to capture. And so I felt that I had to speak to you and to find out a bit about your personality and what your likes were and what your dislikes were, and also because the role that you have within the legal system, but also within the media. Well, because you're on the two sides of it, which is really interesting. And I think to be able to do that, you've got to have a really strong personality, but you've also got to be very welcoming, quite warm and empathetic. So for me, I wanted to be able to bring that within the image itself. And I knew in advance that I was going to shoot you at your house within the garden, but I had never been to the garden before. So I had to be able to kind of visualize from what you had told me. And when I got there, I knew what areas I kind of wanted to focus on. And, for me, when I'm doing a portrait of someone like yourself or Sue, it's not about getting dressed up. It's about being authentic to your personality and who you are and your identity shining through. So that's why I had that conversation to kind of find out what you like to wear, clothes-wise, wear something that you're comfortable with, that you're going to be happy wearing. I'm not going to dictate that. I'm just going to kind of maneuver you into a way that's going to make you comfortable so that I can get the best out of the shoot.
Harry, I want to ask you, because Jenny brought up the issue of the pandemic, how has the experience of being a photographer who's very connected to people, how has pursuing your craft been going for the last 18 months?
Well, it's been quite challenging. I think it kind of focused on a kind of purely dividing up the pie chart of my sort of practice. I kind of turned the focus onto getting my personal work out there. So I'd done a series of portraits of single parent fathers, and so that published in the spring this year, Single Dad on Hoxton Mini Press. And so basically I made a PDF. I had a lot of time on my hands. I was also sort of homeschooling my 10-year-old, but he's quite precocious and didn't need to be managed too much. So I was able to sort of work on these personal projects. And also, I did find that it was actually, after the novelty wore off, we'd been swimming in the river and we'd done all the things that really you should set aside time to do anyway as a parent. I realized how photography kind of has made my life meaningful and enabled me to sort of, the part of my camera's sort of been a passport to sort of have a reason to connect with people. And so, at times I have found it quite difficult. It's kind of helped me appreciate how lucky I am. There's a photographer called Tom Sutter. He's a documentary photographer, and he described being a photographer as having a champagne lifestyle on a beer salary. I think there's something in that, because I just think the camera enables you to sort of have a reason to go into people's homes and ask them really intimate questions, which I do the same thing. And when I'm sort of talking to my subject, both of my subjects for this piece, for me, I quite often, after I've done a shoot, my subjects sort of say that it's like group analysis. We've been through a kind of really got to know each other in a really profoundly intimate way. And I think, it's great. Having a camera enables you to have a reason to connect like that.
Jenny, photographers themselves are actually very interesting people, so it's always a pleasure to meet someone who's a photographer, because you go out and you meet a wide variety of characters and settings. So it's very fascinating to ask a photographer, what else have you been doing this month or this week? There's often a split between the commercial work and the personal and private projects, so it's fascinating to hear.
Just as a little postscript to that, initially, after my initial response to being asked to be involved in this was that actually maybe I suggested a couple of female photographers, because I just thought maybe it would be inappropriate we don't really need another white sort of middle-aged man sort of contributing. But then afterwards, when they is insistent upon me being involved. It was great to have a reason to go out and connect, because I don't know about you, but it had been months since, or certainly weeks since I'd done anything. And so it's like, as I say, it gives our lives meaning.
Go on.
Sorry, yes, definitely. Just to agree with what Harry was saying. I mean, after being in lockdown for months on end, it was just beautiful to be able to kind of just be able to shoot again and to connect with another human being on that level, on a photographic level as well, because, it's something that we enjoy doing as photographers. And so to kind of come out of lockdown after months on end and have something like this to work on it was impactful for me. It was, it was such an enjoyable experience meeting you both and getting to learn about what you both do and having the opportunity to spend time as well.
I wanted to throw over this question about the pandemic to Jen Reid and Sue Wheatcroft. Jen, I'll bring you in first. We entered the pandemic at the absolute height of talking about inequalities and racism and state violence and all of these other things, and then all of a sudden we're put under house arrest for 18 months. What's it been like for you maintaining connection, motivation, and keeping the fire going?
Because of the pandemic, it's just finding other ways to communicate, being very creative and thinking. People did all the black squares of this, but more needs to happen than that. And it's, we've had lots of art projects in Bristol to commemorate the protest that was in Bristol on the 7th of June. And what people have to remember, people marched there for George Floyd. It then turned into the Edward Colston thing. It wasn't about Edward Colston, it was about George Floyd. And I think that had kind of been lost. So for me, it's very important to kind of do loads of interviews to kind of get that message across as to why. Yeah, I'm quite solitary in that sense, pandemic-wise. It's given me a reset. I've got loads of things going on in my life. I look after my elderly parents. It's what people don't realise. I've got so much other stuff going on in my life. That's kind of like the outside of that. But, I've got such serious stuff, like my family and my parents. So it's given me the opportunity actually to care for them more than if there was no pandemic and I was working. So, yeah, they've had the best care from me.
It's so important that you mention other things that are important. We're speaking as if careers, photography, creativity are all that matters when there's a huge amount of other things going on that's happening in life. Life stuff is even more important, and that's why I want to ask you, Sue. I've come to know you through Someone's Daughter as a survivor, an activist, and a leader in this field. But you also have life stuff going on. You're also finding your feet and talking about holding your head up high and growing into this role of an activist. The last 18 months have been difficult for everyone. How have they been for you?
I think I've been busier, actually, because I realise now how much time I wasted getting on a train to go to London for an hour's meeting and then coming back again. And the things that I could have been doing, we could have a Zoom meeting for an hour. I don't need to go. So actually, I've been busy, and my wife is disabled, so she's quite happy. She's quite happy that I'm around more, and because she has carers. So it's done us a favour in a way. And I do run mental health support groups, and we've been able to go international rather than just local. So we have people from Mexico and India and everywhere now. So in that way, I don't want to say anything positive about a pandemic, but in that way, it has done us a little bit of a favour. But yeah, it's been busier. I've been able to do more writing and attend more meetings because I'm not on a train somewhere.
My final question, and I'll stick with you, Sue. First, Photo London has its VIP preview day today. It's opening to the public tomorrow and it's running until the weekend. There are dozens and dozens of exhibitors, but none are combining art and activism in quite the way that Someone's Daughter does. So let me just ask you first, what do you want people to take away from the Someone's Daughter project and the portraits?
I'm thinking of people who want to do something about what's going on, whether it's mental health, women in prison, or both, and look at what's gone on through Someone's Daughter and believe in themselves and think, well, for example, my story, I wasn't an activist. But I found the strength. They can find the strength as well. If they don't feel strong enough right now, look at the people around Photo London and Someone's Daughter and Even if you do something small, it doesn't matter. You're doing it for yourself as well as other people. And it makes you feel great to be part of something like this, but also to try and change things. It's very good for your mental health, for a start, because you've got a mission, if you like.
Jenny Baptiste, people take on board that sense of mission that Sue talks about. What would you like them to take away as a photographer who shot 2 of the women as part of the Someone's Daughter project?
I think for me, I'd like people to take away an awareness, to kind of delve deeper, to look further into it, take those small steps to educate themselves. This was an entire new journey for me as well as a photographer. And, when I was approached by Claire initially, straight away, I was like, yes, I want to be involved, because it's empowering, and it's doing something that's going to help, but also it's going to create an awareness and a change, which is, fundamentally the most important thing.
Harry, I'll bring you in here. You've spoken about your initial trepidation about being involved in this. We're now celebrating the flourishing endpoint, in fact, the launch of Someone's Daughter. What would you like someone to see and to feel and to think about when they start coming in at the public viewing tomorrow?
Well, I just reiterate what Jenny said. I mean, I just think it's important to raise awareness of these issues, and not to waste so much talent and kind of human potential. It just seems so unjust. In fact, I was actually watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest the other night, which I hadn't seen for ages, and the person I was with pointed out that JFK, this is kind of quite a little-known esoteric fact, but John F. Kennedy, his father, had a daughter who was lobotomized and basically lived until her 80s in a sanitarium as a zombie, because she was sort of considered to be sort of hysterical and that she suffered from nymphomania. This is the term they used at the time. And I just think that, so much human potential is wasted. We're moving in the right direction. We don't lobotomize women because they don't conform to a sort of a narrow idea of what we consider to be acceptable, but we do sort of incarcerate them. And I think, as Jenny said, it's really about raising awareness. That's why I sort of wanted to be involved. I have an eldest daughter that I'm actually doing a collaborative project with. She's 25, and basically whenever we're together, starting at the beginning of 2019, she draws a picture of me and I photograph her, and it's called First Drawn. I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's by far and away my most important project as far as I'm concerned, because it sort of encapsulates my role as a father and also as somebody who's an advocate for her and for women generally.
Jen Reid, final words from you. We're reaching the culmination point of Someone's Daughter. This is obviously going to run and run, but tell us where we can go from here.
For me, it's people to look at these images of women, look into their eyes. And it's about them as people, as their circumstances, and the courage that it's taken them to be where they are now. Everybody has a story. The easiest thing to do is not always the right thing to do. And I want each of these women to be honoured for that up here, and just to keep on having that conversation, to force conversations and to make change. And we can do that all collect with the support of each other.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Harry Borden, Jenny Baptiste, photographers, Sue Wheatcroft and Jen Reid, activists. Someone's Daughter is our campaign to change the way that you see justice. That brings to a close our second podcast, a discussion which has been all about the relationship between art and activism and the sitter. Go online and search for Someone's Daughter to see powerful women photographed by world-renowned and acclaimed photographers. Read their stories in the VIEW Magazine and be inspired by these very shocking narratives, but also by these excellent constructive solutions. Thank you everyone who's been part of the podcast today. Check in next week for our third podcast about Someone's Daughter, Can Women with Lived Experience Be Part of the Solution? Hosted by Claire Bairstow.
The VIEW would like to thank our Someone's Daughter sponsors, Guernica 37 International Law Chambers, who represent people all over the world where injustice and harm is being done, and Instalaw, prison law and criminal defence listers based in the North East. Thank you for all that you do and all that you are, and for making someone's daughter possible.